My husband sold my dead mother's jewelry for $50K while I traveled, but I had GPS trackers on them. Police discovered he was a fraud, and now he's going to prison for 4 years. I'm 34 years old. I work as a marketing director at a consulting firm, and I still can't believe this actually happened to me. About 6 months ago, I discovered that my husband, Daniel, had sold my entire jewelry collection. And when I say entire, I mean absolutely everything I had, including pieces that had belonged to my grandmother and my mother. What started as a simple theft ended up being something much bigger. And I guess I need to tell this story because there are days when it still doesn't seem real. Let me start from the beginning, or at least from where things made sense. I met Daniel like 9 years ago at a business conference. He worked in real estate investments, had that confidence and charisma that make you feel like the person really knows what they're doing. You know? We got married 3 years later, and for the first few years everything seemed perfect. We had a nice house on the outskirts of the city, good jobs, occasional trips, the typical upper middle class life you're supposed to want. I had my jewelry collection that I'd been building since I was a teenager. Some pieces I'd inherited, others I'd bought myself when I got promotions or hit important goals at work. It's not like I was a millionaire or anything, but let's say I had like 15 or 20 really valuable pieces, like a diamond necklace that had been my grandmother's, some emerald earrings my mother gave me before she died, a gold bracelet I bought when I got promoted to director, things with sentimental value and also economic value, obviously. Daniel had always been ambitious. I liked that about him at first. He talked about expanding his business, making bigger investments, building something really important. I supported him, honestly, because he seemed to know what he was doing and his previous projects had worked out well. But like a year before everything exploded, he started acting weird. He'd get defensive when I asked about work, spent hours locked in his home office. There were phone calls he'd cut off when I walked into the room. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. But I guess when you really trust someone, you don't want to see the red flags that are there. In March of this year, I had to travel to Chicago for a work conference. I was going to be gone like 5 days. Daniel seemed normal when I left. He drove me to the airport, gave me a goodbye kiss, told me he'd miss me. All super normal. I was busy with presentations and meetings, barely had time to talk to him beyond quick messages like, "How was your day?" and stuff like that. I got back on a Friday afternoon, took an Uber from the airport because Daniel said he had an important meeting and couldn't pick me up. Again, nothing weird yet. I got home around 6 in the evening, left my suitcase in the entrance, went straight to the bathroom because I'd been traveling for hours and needed a shower. It was when I opened my jewelry box that the world literally stopped. It was empty, completely empty. There wasn't a single piece. At first I thought maybe Daniel had moved it for some reason, like maybe they were doing deep cleaning or something. I checked all the drawers in my dresser, the safe we had in the closet, even looked under the bed thinking maybe something had fallen. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I ran downstairs and called Daniel. He answered on the second ring, super casual, and I said, "Where's my jewelry box?" There was a long silence, like 5 or 6 seconds that felt like an eternity, and then he said, "Catherine, we need to talk about that when I get home." And I said, "No, we need to talk about that right now. What did you do with my jewelry?" And he sighed, like I was the one being irrational, and said, "I sold them. I needed capital for the new investment. I'll explain everything when I get there." And he hung up. He literally hung up the phone. I stood there in the middle of the living room with my cell phone in my hand, trying to process what I'd just heard. He sold them. He sold my jewelry. Pieces that some were 50 years old in my family. Things my mother had specifically given me to preserve. And he'd done it while I was out of town, without asking me, without telling me anything. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Literally couldn't breathe properly. My hands were shaking and I had that horrible feeling in my chest, like when you know something terrible just happened, but your brain still hasn't fully processed it. Then I remembered something. Like 2 years ago, I'd read an article about a woman who'd tracked her stolen jewelry using a tracking app, like the ones you use to find your phone if you lose it. I'd put small trackers on some of my most valuable pieces, specifically on my grandmother's necklace and the gold bracelet, because after a robbery in the neighborhood I'd gotten paranoid. I opened the app on my phone with my hands still shaking, and there they were. The red dots showing the locations. The necklace was at a consignment store downtown, the bracelet at an auction house on the east side of the city. I immediately called Nicole, my best friend since college. I told her everything between sobs, because by that point I was already crying from pure rage and betrayal. Nicole told me, "Catherine, you need to call the police right now. This isn't just betrayal, it's theft." And I said, "But he's my husband. Can I really do that?" And she said, "I don't care if he's your husband, the Pope, or the president. He stole from you, period." That woke me up a bit. She was right. I called the police department and explained the situation. They told me to come file a formal report, to bring any evidence I had. I grabbed my laptop where I had photos of all the pieces. He'd photographed them for insurance like a couple years ago. Printed out the receipts for the ones I'd bought myself, and went straight to the police station. The detective who saw me was named Bennett, a guy like 50-something years old with the face of someone who'd seen everything. I told him the whole story, showed him the photos, the receipts, and most importantly, I showed him the app with the real-time locations of 2 of the pieces. Bennett got serious immediately. He told me, "This is more common than you'd think, unfortunately, but we usually don't have this much evidence this quickly. We're going to need you to give me all the details you can about each piece, any documentation you have, and we're going to start recovering them." He also asked if I knew anything about Daniel's finances, if I'd seen anything suspicious beyond the jewelry theft. I told him about his weird behavior the last few months, the mysterious calls, how defensive he'd get about work. Bennett wrote everything down and told me they were going to investigate. Daniel got home around 9 at night. I was sitting in the living room, waiting for him. No longer crying, but with that cold rage that's almost worse than hysteria. He came in with that fake smile he'd perfected. Like, "Everything's going to be fine, honey. Let me explain." He sat across from me and started with his prepared speech about how this incredible investment opportunity had come up, that it was going to double our money in 6 months, that he'd needed to act fast, and hadn't had time to consult me, that he knew I'd understand because I always supported him. He talked for like 10 minutes nonstop, justifying himself, minimizing what he'd done. And when he finished, I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I called the police." I saw how his face transformed, from that fake confidence to real panic in a matter of seconds. He said, "What did you do, what?" And I answered, "I filed a theft report. I have trackers on some of the pieces. The police already know where they are, and they're going to recover them. Plus, they're going to investigate your finances, because I suspect there are more things you haven't told me." He turned pale. I literally saw the color drain from his face. He started stammering something about how I was overreacting, that we were married, and that wasn't theft, that I was going to ruin him over nothing. I told him, "Get out of this house now." And I called Nicole to come stay with me because honestly, I was afraid to be alone with him. The next few days were total chaos. Daniel went to a hotel, or so he said. I didn't really care where he was, to be honest. Detective Bennett called me on the second day to tell me they'd started tracing the jewelry and had found something interesting. Turns out Daniel hadn't just sold my jewelry, he'd been moving money in pretty suspicious ways in his business. He had accounts he hadn't mentioned to me, had taken out loans using our house as collateral without telling me, basically had built a whole parallel financial life I knew nothing about. Bennett told me they were investigating possible fraud, not just the jewelry theft. I felt like an idiot. You know? Like, how did I not see any of this? I'd been married to this man for 6 years. We lived together, shared bank accounts, or so I thought. And it turns out I didn't know him at all. Nicole constantly reminded me it wasn't my fault, that manipulators are experts at hiding who they really are, but I still felt stupid. The police started recovering the jewelry. It was a long process, because Daniel had sold them in different places, some at consignment stores, others at auction houses. He'd even sold 2 pieces directly to private collectors he found online. Every time Bennett called to tell me they'd recovered another piece, I felt relief, mixed with more rage, because each recovery was evidence of how much Daniel had betrayed me. It wasn't just that he'd sold them. He'd scattered them all over the city like they were trash, like they meant nothing. Like 2 weeks after filing the report, I went to see a lawyer. His name was Collins. He was a family law specialist, and Nicole recommended him because he'd helped a cousin of hers with a complicated divorce. I told him the whole situation, showed him the police documentation, the bank reports I'd gotten. Collins looked at me and said, "Catherine, this goes beyond a simple divorce. This is marital fraud and theft. You have a very strong case." He explained I could file for divorce with justified cause, that I could fight to keep the house since Daniel had used marital assets illegally, and that I should protect my finances immediately. And that same week, I froze all joint accounts, moved my money to new accounts. I opened only in my name, changed all the passwords for everything. Collins prepared the divorce papers and told me we were going to serve Daniel formally. I was nervous, not because I wanted to get back with him, that was crystal clear was never going to happen, but because I knew when he received the papers things were going to get ugly. They served him on a Tuesday morning at his office. I found out because he called me, like 30 seconds later, screaming on the phone, saying I was destroying his life, that he'd made a mistake but we could fix it, that we didn't need to go this far. I hung up on him. He called like 10 more times. I blocked his number. Then he started sending me long, dramatic emails about how I was the love of his life, that he'd acted out of desperation, that the investment was really going to work and he'd be able to prove it to me. Pure manipulation. I didn't answer a single one. By the end of April, the police investigation had found enough evidence to file formal charges against Daniel, not just for the jewelry theft, but for fraud in his business. Turns out the famous investment opportunity he'd sold my stuff for was basically a Ponzi scheme he was setting up with 2 other partners. They'd been promising impossible returns to investors, using new investors' money to pay old ones, the classic pyramid scam. My jewelry wasn't going to any legitimate investment. It was going to cover the holes in his fraud so they wouldn't discover it so quickly. When I found out about that, I was shocked. I mean, I knew he'd stolen from me and betrayed me, but discovering he was also a criminal, that he'd been scamming people, that he could potentially go to jail, was too much. I finally told my family he'd been avoiding that conversation because I was embarrassed, and my dad wanted to go find Daniel and basically kill him. I had to convince him that justice would take care of it, that the last thing I needed was for my father to also have legal problems. The process of recovering the jewelry took like 3 full months. The police were incredible, honestly. Bennett worked with stores, auction houses, private collectors, basically traced every piece. In the end, I recovered like 90% of the collection. There were 3 or 4 pieces they couldn't find because they'd been sold out of state, and it was too complicated to track them, but most came back when Bennett gave me my grandmother's necklace. I cried. Not from sadness, but from pure relief. It was like recovering a piece of my mom. You know what I mean? Daniel tried to negotiate during the divorce process. His lawyer proposed that I drop the criminal charges in exchange for him signing the divorce without fighting for anything. Collins told me I didn't have to accept that the criminal charges were separate from the divorce, and that I didn't control that anyway. It was the prosecutor's decision now. I said no. Whether he signed the divorce or not, the charges continued. His lawyer tried to make me look vindictive, like I just wanted to destroy Daniel. And yes, part of me wanted him to pay for what he did. I won't deny it, but more than anything, I wanted justice. The divorce was finalized in August. I kept the house after Collins proved Daniel had used marital assets for criminal activities. Basically, the judge decided Daniel had lost any right to shared properties because of his actions. I didn't ask for alimony or anything. I just wanted it all to be over. The day we signed the final papers, I didn't even look at him. He walked into the lawyer's office, looking like a beaten dog, signed where they told him, and left. That was it. 6 years of marriage ended with a signature. The criminal charges are still in process. His trial is scheduled for December. The prosecutor told me he'll probably accept a guilty plea to avoid going to trial, that they'll probably give him like 3 or 4 years in prison with possibility of reduction for good behavior. Honestly, I don't know how I feel about that. Part of me wants him to pay for a long time. Another part just wants to forget he ever existed. Nicole is still my favorite person in the world. She was there literally every day during the worst moments. Nights where I cried, wondering how I'd been so blind. Days where I was so angry I couldn't function. Moments where I needed someone to remind me I hadn't done anything wrong. My family was also incredible once they got over the initial shock. My dad wanted to pay for a more expensive lawyer than Collins, but I told him Collins was doing an excellent job and I didn't need to change. Now, I'm in a weird place. I guess, on one hand, I feel stronger than ever. I faced a horrible situation, made difficult decisions, didn't let myself be manipulated into going back or dropping the charges. I recovered my jewelry, recovered my house, recovered my dignity. On the other hand, there are days where I still wonder how I didn't see the signs, how I trusted someone so much who turned out to be completely different from who I thought he was. Collins told me those are normal scars from this kind of betrayal, that eventually they'll hurt less. I went back to work full-time like a month after everything exploded. My boss was super understanding, gave me flexibility when I needed to go to meetings with lawyers or talk to the police. Work honestly helped me stay sane, gave me something to focus on that wasn't the chaos of my personal life. Plus, I needed the money because lawyers aren't cheap, although Collins gave me a discount because he knew how complicated the situation was. 2 weeks ago, I reorganized the whole house. I donated or threw away anything that reminded me of Daniel. His clothes that were still in the closet, books that were his. I even changed the living room furniture because I didn't want to sit where he used to sit. Nicole came to help me, and we ended up doing like a weird ceremony where we burned old wedding photos in the backyard. Sounds dramatic. I know, but it was cathartic. The jewelry is back in my jewelry box, but now I have a new safe with better security. I also hired a financial monitoring service to make sure no one can access my accounts or use my identity to take out loans or open new accounts. Basically, I became super paranoid about security. But after what happened, I think it's justified. Yesterday, I was cleaning the attic and found a box with letters Daniel had written me when we were dating. I read them out of curiosity, and it was weird because they seemed sincere. Like he really seemed to love me at that time. I wonder at what exact point he changed, or if he was always like this and I just saw what I wanted to see. I guess I'll never know the real answer, and maybe that's okay. I threw the letters away anyway. People ask me if I'd trust someone again, if I see myself having another relationship someday. Honestly, I don't know. Right now, I'm fine alone, like really fine. I have my house, my job, my friends, my family. I don't need someone else to feel complete. Maybe in the future things will change. But for now, I'm focused on rebuilding my life my way, without the weight of Daniel's lies. What I do know is that I'll never ignore red flags again. I'll never let someone make me doubt my instinct again. And never, ever, will I allow someone to have that level of control over my life again. Daniel took many things from me, but he didn't take my strength, and that's the only thing that really matters. Last week, I put on my grandmother's necklace for the first time since I recovered it. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for a second I saw my mom, because she also wore it exactly like that. And I thought, she'd be proud of how I handled all this. That was enough.